Major funding for this program was provided by grants from William and Judith Bollinger, the University of Texas at Austin, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, Itron, the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Bequest Foundation, and the Cynthia and George Mitchell Foundation. Additional funding provided by the Julius Rabinowitz family, the Winkler Family Foundation, the Tiller Family Foundation, the Pritzker Innovation Fund, and Arena Energy.
This is Power Trip, the story of energy.
Power Trip is the story of energy from the past to the future. Energy is what makes our modern world modern. Energy is all around us, hidden in plain sight. Power is also a play on words. It's not just energy, it's also political power, or economic power, or wealth. Energy has lifted a lot of us out of poverty. I'm Michael Weber, and I study energy and water. Now, it turns out that managing water and managing energy goes back thousands of years. The idea is not new. For all the things in the ancient world that we needed, people used different forms of energy. They used manpower or animal power, and eventually they used water power. You need a couple gallons of water per person every day just to live. But if you add in all the other luxuries we have in modern life, washing our food and boiling our food, doing our laundry, and then irrigating our lawns, it's more like 150 gallons of water every day for every person. Eventually we went to animal power, things like horses and horsepower. In fact, horsepower is a measure of how much power you can get from the horse to raise water out of a well. And the idea of inventing a new way to move water is nothing new. Archimedes, thousands of years ago in the age of antiquity, came up with the Archimedes screw. Eureka! A clever device to help people raise water out of low-lying rivers to neighboring fields. It turns out that it takes a lot of energy to pump water because water is so dense.
In the ancient world, water was a key for settling. Being located in the Middle East, we are part of the desert belt. So, of course, everything depends on water.
In the old days, people lived where the water was, just so they could thrive. And that's the way it was for millennia. Even at a cellular level, you need water for the functioning of the cells. And we need water for the movement of nutrients around a body. We need water for the growth of a plant. We need water for all life. Then we eventually went to the age of machines, where a machine using the energy in the coal or the natural gas or the petroleum could do the work of many animals that could do the work of many humans. We flip a switch and it does the hard work for us.
As water flows, it has a velocity, speed associated with it, and we can harness that kinetic energy for useful work through machinery, like generating electricity.
One of the biggest, most important electric installations in the history of the world was at Niagara Falls in the 1890s. That meant that power around the Buffalo, Niagara Falls area was the cheapest in the world. It meant that many industries that rely heavily on cheap electric power established them right there at Niagara Falls. Electrochemical industries, aluminum production, other electricity-intensive industries.
So we built these dams in the early 19th century. They were powering a lot of this growing industry. Then you scale that up, and now we realize we can move electricity a long distance. We don't necessarily need to build manufacturing facilities right next to a river. Now we can actually move those farther and farther away from rivers themselves. And that then starts to open up the idea of an entire electric grid. The 1920s especially was an era of, we were just starting to go into a dam building frenzy. The Tennessee Valley was the dirtiest, poorest place in America. We weren't sure whether or not we were getting gouged by private electric companies. And FDR wanted to build something big. The experiment was, can we electrify an entire valley? Can we, society writ large, take a dirt poor area and give it electricity, and will that area actually come out of poverty simply by introducing electricity into that area?
What that meant for rural life, specifically for women, was that they were liberated from a lot of manual labor. Electrification meant all of that was replaced with an electric pump, an electric stove, eventually piped water to the home. It's amazing what electricity can do for liberating women from housework that is so labor-intensive.
And as women became liberated from their chores, from the tedious tasks that were requiring so much manual effort, they could do other things. They could join the workforce. They could accumulate wealth.
Employers find that women can do many jobs as well as men, some jobs better.
So we see the rise of modern forms of energy and additional freedoms going hand in hand.
The constructing of dams was often done for reasons not involving electricity. In a lot of the large hydropower dams that we have in the United States, power is actually an afterthought.
The way that politicians retain power and consolidate power.
Politicians historically love dam projects because there's a lot of money involved. So it makes a very nice self-reinforcing cycle of people getting real benefits, and some of those benefits paying off for the politicians who would help to secure them.
Dams over the history of humanity have always been symbols of power. And that's because dams improve lives. They store water for irrigation and electrical power.
There are also environmental costs. There are trade-offs, and the question is whose ox is getting gored, who's losing and who's winning. Who are the losers? Well, the people who lived in the area right behind the dam. They get flooded out. Hydroelectric projects are some of the biggest civil engineering projects ever in the history of the world. In many instances, I think it is a net win, but I think there are people who pay the price too.
There are strong connections between water and energy. It takes a lot of energy to get water into our homes and into our lives in the way that we use and enjoy water. And that connection between water and energy is something we call the energy-water nexus.
Water is life. So energy is the ability to live the life, is the tool to use the water to better their lives and change the economic status of their villages. So definitely, water and energy are very connected. You can't give one and exclude the other.
The challenges that we face regarding freshwater supply is how to bridge between the increasing demand and water availability.
Unless we integrate our thinking, unless we think about water and energy and food and climate together, we're going to make the wrong decisions.
Food and energy go hand in hand because food is a form of energy. Food is the form of energy our bodies use to operate as muscles. It's we're like a power plant, and food is the fuel for our power plant. And food is grown with energy, primarily solar energy. Sunshine comes in, and that is captured by plants through the photosynthetic process. Photosynthesis takes CO2, water, nutrients, and sunshine, and turns that into stored energy in the plants. And plants are at the basis for our food system because even the proteins, like animals or fish, eat those plants. So we're all eating solar energy in one form or another.
Just as the availability of modern forms of energy revolutionized our access to water, the food system was revolutionized by diesel for tractors, oil and gas for fertilizers and insecticides, and electricity for refrigeration. Energy liberated us from the shackles of manual labor and reduced the unpredictability of nature. Energy made our lives easier.
Hi, how are you doing? Good, I'm ready for lunch. Because of the modern energy system, we can have things like this 5,000-mile salad, where the different parts of it came together from around the world, all for my convenience and taste. We grew the food using fertilizers made from natural gas. We harvested it with machines using diesel. Then we ship it or truck it to a central facility for processing and chopping and wrapping it in plastic made from fossil fuels. Refrigerate it with electricity, maybe made from coal or maybe solar power or something like that. So there's all these different forms of energy that come into the salad to bring it here together at this time, just so I have a nice, healthy lunch.
way our society is structured, the processing of food becomes very invisible. It's distant from us.
Energy availability has been a critical issue for this food supply that not only feeds our own growing population of now 325 million, but also an enormous export option as we feed many across the world.
So if we look towards 2050 and that we need to be able to produce twice as much food in order to sustain that population, everyone's going like, how are we going to achieve that?
What we are confronted with right now is a tripling of human population, no increase of water, land, and so on, while at the same time, an immense waste challenge. We are wasting about 40% of the food produced today in the world, not just in the United States, but globally.
While we're searching for solutions to our climate challenge, a lot of people expect that technology and new innovations are going to get us there, when in reality, if we address food waste now, there'll be a lot of change that we can do without having to invent our way out of the problem.
When you think about what it takes to grow, transport, cool, cook, shop for, get it back to your home, everything it takes to get food to our tables, there's an enormous amount of energy built into that process. It's primarily fossil fuel energy.
10% of our national energy consumption is embedded in the food system. We have more energy embedded in the food we throw away than Sweden uses for all purposes over the course of a year. You could run entire countries on the energy embedded in the edible food that we did not eat. It's really incredible. The scale is hard to understand.
I think another way of looking at waste is that it's actually wealth. So how do we not see it as something that's unnecessary, but we re-examine that waste as, okay, what context is that waste wealth?
You might say we're addicted to energy, and that's because it gives us so much. Gasoline is one of the great liberators of society. In a gallon of gasoline, I have a tremendous amount of energy, enough energy to take me dozens of miles in a car. A trip that would have taken weeks now takes hours. But gasoline's quite complicated. It's a complicated mix of molecules, and it got here in a complicated way. There's a whole supply chain of actions that happened before we got to this point. You bring a barrel of oil out of the ground, about 10% of the energy in that barrel is just to pipe it, refine it, move it, store it, and then it goes into my tank. So we've already lost 10% of the energy in the oil before I ever get it to my car engine. So gasoline has its environmental downsides, but it's a modern fuel. It's actually one of the cleaner fuels.
Back when the automobile was new, it was regarded as an environmental savior. It didn't produce horse manure. Similarly, lower density living at the edge of the city was seen as a place of fresh air. The automobile was even safer as it was first perceived.
The downsides are that we've now built our modern society around the car.
Transportation has evolved in its current form factor over more than 100 years. The automobile took over and proliferated. It's also become its own worst enemy at times. It's moved from an environment where there were maybe not enough cars to a situation in developed countries where the car park can't exceed the population or is close to the population.
Our cities have been taken over by cars. These highways crisscross the nation, dividing societies, cutting up the land, worsening air quality. The pollution also accumulates in a way that causes global climate change. So there are downsides too that we have to manage. We have to manage the noise pollution, the sight pollution, the water pollution, and the air pollution. I like the liberty, the ability to move, the desire to go to place, and how the cars enable that. So I want the good things of transportation, but without the bad things. And that means rethinking it from scratch. The good news is that energy sources usually improve over time, that we can go from one primitive form and an inefficient device to a better form of energy and a more efficient device. The transitions from the older technologies and the older forms of fuels have been enabled by key innovators along the way. People with names you might recognize, like Tesla, Edison, Watt, Joule, many people who were really smart who thought there must be a better way, and they created the devices that some of which we still use today. So new engines and new fuels together enabled a revolution in transportation. We're going to need innovation from private industry and entrepreneurs. We're going to need large-scale companies to commercialize the solutions. We're going to need individual decision makers like you and I to change our behavior. The typical solution to reduce traffic congestion is just to build more lanes. We have some highways in America that are 16 lanes across, yet there's still a lot of traffic congestion. The joke is that trying to ease traffic congestion by building more lanes for cars is a little bit like trying to solve obesity by buying a bigger belt. In a place where the space is constrained and you just don't have room for everyone to have a car, the government is often taking a step to solve it. In Singapore, they control it by managing how many people can have a car. They don't have more room to grow in Singapore. They have to manage their space efficiently. Singapore is interesting because it's a city-state, and it's a city-state that thinks about its resources because it has very limited land, and so it has to think about what it's consuming and what it's producing and managing its waste. And it does this all in a way with an eye towards the future, so it tends to be a pretty futuristic area. They can't build more roads, they're out of space. And they know that the roads of the current system can accommodate as many cars as they have. And Singapore has a limit on the number of cars they have on the island, so mass transit's very important for them.
Transportation has shaped our societies. Where we travel and how we travel on any given day simultaneously gives order and freedom to our lives. And as the machines we use for transportation change, our concept of place changes along with it. Transportation has given shape to countries. Canals did it in the early 1800s. Rail did it in the late 1800s through the first half of the 20th century. And highways did it in the late 1900s. Autonomous vehicles, if and when they fully arrive, will change the rhythm of our lives yet again.
To solve the problem of pollution, we're going to need all hands on deck. We're going to need planners at every level, city, state, and federal, to come up with building codes and urban layouts and regional planning that really fosters innovation and efficiency, as opposed to encouraging the wasteful consumption of resources. We're all richer now because of energy.
Energy can convert a common substance that is worth about the same per pound as lead into something worth more than gold. In the story of Rumpelstiltskin, a magical alchemist is called upon to transform common materials into gold. That process is now a daily activity by the world's petrochemical industry.
Movies shape our attitudes about energy and reflect our attitudes about energy. One of my favorites is Giant, which is about the transformation of Texas from an agricultural state to an oil and gas state.
Sure is. Buy him out, Ollie. Buy him out and get him out of here.
If you had good luck and hard work, you could get rich. And that was a part of the theme of the movie.
Before oil, there was no industry in Texas. Spindletop, the great discovery in 1901, of course, changed all that.
Everybody thought I had a duster? Y'all thought old Spindletop and old Burke Burnett was all oil was, didn't you? Well, I'm here to tell you it ain't, boy. It's here. And there ain't a dang thing you gonna do about it.
Spindletop, in its first 5 months, generated more oil than had ever been found in the history of the United States. In 5 months. Spindletop created not only an entire industry, but an entire mythos that attracted hundreds of thousands of Americans who thought they could find a Spindletop. And in Texas, a few dozen did. But I think where oil mattered most for Texas was in terms of political power. For years, all political money was on Fifth Avenue. Texas political power really arose from a series of massive oil fields that were found in Texas during the Great Depression. Most of those oil fields were found by individual Texans rather than large companies. And so the mobilization of this sudden gusher of Texas oil money really didn't become a thing in Washington until into the 1940s. And LBJ really controlled that spigot for Washington. If you wanted this incredible new money, you went to LBJ.
One of the things about oil and gas is more people got rich off oil and gas than got rich off of coal. Oil and gas touches more people and benefits more people from its production. So you can have concentration of the control of energy, and that invites the possibility for concentration of control of wealth. You could also have democratized access to energy, and that means democratized access and freedoms as well.
I think people today have very little idea of how dark it really was. It's a big deal now if you have a blackout. The power goes out. Well, the power was always out. It was always a blackout before the 1890s, most places.
Once upon a time, after dark, you really didn't have anything to do but go to bed. Cities, everywhere, were very dark places. You couldn't really work after about 6.
And so how did people get around? They walked around in the dark. The moonlight was very important to people, and people would arrange their movements sometimes according to whether it was a full moon or not. Who pays attention to that anymore? Well, astronomers, I guess, but nobody else.
Cities saw benefit in the public safety and the personal security of people of having lighting because it made cities safer after dark.
It's much safer for women, it's much safer for poor people. You're much more likely to be able to find your way. There's a very heavy pressure to bring lights to cities.
If you look at a city from above, it might look like a living organism. There are resources that come in, food and water and energy, and then wastes that go out. And that flow of inputs and outputs, we call that the urban metabolism.
Urban centers absolutely depend on their surrounding areas. Surrounding areas depend on the city too, because that's the market for their products. So rather than seeing an adversarial relationship between cities and the countryside, what we really should see is that those two worlds are completely integrated.
When you have a city and you have an urban metabolism, you can think about the waste generation as the problem you need to manage. The bigger the city, the more waste you generate, and the more inputs you also need to operate the city. And we can think about efficiency as that measure from inputs to outputs. A more efficient city needs fewer inputs to operate itself and therefore generates fewer outputs as well. So efficiency is a way to reduce the waste stream.
So cities are increasingly important because they're efficient places for the delivery of needed goods and services. Rather than wasteful or using up resources, you can actually use cities as an efficient delivery mechanism for the many, many different things that people need in concentrated spaces.
We have gotten better at our urban metabolism in many places. Buildings are more efficient, cars are more efficient, that kind of thing. However, the cities have also become bigger at the same time. So the total flow has increased in most places.
Our industrial progress and economic growth was fired by what many seem to look on as endless energy. But warning signs were there. Until 1950, the United States could supply the energy needed. But in less than 25 years, we found ourselves in trouble. By 1970, we imported 1/3 of our oil and gas, relying on others to meet new needs.
Geography is a part of the geopolitical story of oil, partly because of who has the oil to produce it and who consumes oil. This geographic distinction invites this national security vulnerability.
Energy is required for virtually everything we do. You know, traffic lights, air traffic control, communications, finances, emergency response, basic utilities, water, sewer, they all depend on energy.
Energy is it's the lifeblood of an economy. And that's where overexposure to one source is of great concern.
If we're so dependent on oil, then we're connected to one region of the world much more than the rest. That's a major concern.
We're a very energy-intense society now in the United States and globally. So everything requires a steady supply of energy. So if you don't have it, you're going to have to get it.
Over the last 100 years, we have fought wars over energy, and energy has changed the way wars are fought. Has energy made us more secure or less?
Let
position be absolutely clear. An attempt by any outside force to gain control of the Persian Gulf region will be regarded as an assault on the vital interests of the United States of America, and such an assault will be repelled by any means necessary, including military force.
So President Carter said oil is worth fighting over. A decade plus later, President Bush launched a war over oil under the Carter Doctrine.
Saddam Hussein wanted access to Kuwaiti oil fields and Kuwaiti infrastructure and Kuwaiti ports and all of the nice things that the Kuwaitis have down there, and he decided to take it. We had a large force massed in Kuwait, and the decision was made to get into the rear area of the Iraqi army and destroy them from really a couple of fronts. So in order to do that, a large portion of our forces had to drive out into the desert for days.
Amateurs study tactics, but professionals study logistics.
So in order to move all of those armored vehicles into the desert and set up that attack, it required a large amount of petroleum products. That required energy to move it. You know, there might have been other ways to win the war, but what really allowed it to happen was the logistics of it all.
Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait to get access to Kuwaiti oil, and the United States invaded back to push him out to protect that oil. And as Saddam Hussein and his troops retreated, they set oil wells on fire.
We got experts from the oil industry, many of them from Texas, that put out oil well fires when they do occur, but they were just one after the other. And the dramatic, not only economic impacts to the region, but the environment around the world.
You know, that's one of the greatest examples of oil, petroleum products, and fossil fuels being used as a weapon. And, you know, essentially saying, if we can't have them, then we'll deny them to you as well. But they underestimated the will of the world to fix that problem.
In the modern world, energy is all around us. It's embedded in the products we use. It is what enables the things we like. Energy done the right way gives us liberty, it makes us rich, it gives us a quality of life we could only dream of. But energy done the wrong way pollutes the air, pollutes the water, undermines our national security, and makes us poor. I love energy because it liberates us. The good news is that it liberates us from the burdens of just trying to stay alive. It makes it easier for us to stay warm if it's cold outside, or it makes it easier for us to stay cold if it's hot outside. It makes it easier for us to have food. It makes it easier for us to have motion and clean water. There are all these things that energy gives us that's really incredible. And so there's this optimism or enthusiasm we should have around energy because of what it does for us. But we have to be mindful of the downsides so that we use energy the right way so it doesn't kill us. The big picture with energy is that there are all sorts of trade-offs. There's no one energy technology, fuel, or option that is all good. They all have downsides. And so we have to manage our choices with a suite of options so we get mostly good stuff and less of the bad stuff. We're due for another innovator. For the next wave of people who need the benefits of energy and need the economic prospects that come along with it, I'd like to see it happen in a way that's cleaner, that doesn't have the downside impacts, that doesn't have the air pollution, and doesn't trigger the asthma attacks, and doesn't denude the land of its trees. So you're doing a couple energy conversions, that's great. And will it fly in a circle? Some people are concerned we're running out of energy, and we're really not. We've got plenty of energy. There might be certain forms of energy that are getting more expensive to produce, but other forms of energy, like the tides that are pulled up and down by the moon, that's not going to run out. Or the sunshine that comes in that gives us solar energy. That solar energy gives us wind. The wind gives us waves. That's not going to run out. So we have plenty of energy, and it's going to last for billions of years. We just have to change our mindset. We have to change the way we think about energy. We have to change the technologies and the ways we harness it. People who have access to energy have access to freedom. They have access to education. They have the opportunity to improve their standing and their well-being. We need everybody to be engaged on the solution. Energy has a democratizing effect because all of a sudden you can read a book. You don't have to rely on someone else for information. It's because you have the ability to go to town and participate in your civic elections. Energy is freeing and democratizing and liberating, and that's a good news story for all of us.